Today's impersonators, Eileen and David Patch of Endwell, New York, will portray Mary and Abraham Lincoln. Both are charter members of the Binghamton Civil War Historical Society and Roundtable. They have pursued Civil War history for a number of years. The Patches have attended several Lincoln Forum symposia commemorating Remembrance Day, November 19 at Gettysburg. For the past 9 years, they spent the last week of June attending the Civil War Institute at Gettysburg College. Abraham Lincoln was born in Hardin County, Kentucky in 1809. Mary Todd Lincoln was born in Lexington, Kentucky in 1818. The historic couple, allowed to revisit the earth, will recall incidents from their past lives. In a moment, President and Mrs. Lincoln will be in our midst. Dressed in Civil War-era clothes, they will include humor, pathos, and the mundane in their presentation. Please give them a hearty welcome.
Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. Merci beaucoup. You know, I went to a French school.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for arranging for us to come from the grave to here. Temporarily.
We returned to your 21st century to share some of our memories at Glen Haven, a place I never expected to see. Did you, Father? But no. It's not far from Binghamton, where Judge Sherman Phelps had that lovely home. Do you remember Judge Sherman Phelps?
Sherman Phelps was an elector in the 1860 election. Yep, when I was elected president.
Yes, you always attributed your winning that nomination to your trip to New York City that you took in was it February of '60, I believe, and you gave a speech at Cooper Union.
Yes, in that speech, I argued that the 39 signers of the Constitution felt that the federal government had a say as to the question of slavery in our country. And I proved it with numerous examples.
And that speech appeared in all the newspapers the next morning, and it even circulated as a pamphlet. So when invited to speak throughout New England, the audiences already knew what he would say, but still, you could always mesmerize a crowd, Father. You wrote a letter to me from that trip east, and you wrote that you visited our Bobby, who was going to school in Exeter, New Hampshire, and you wrote, "This is Sunday morning, and according to Bob's orders, I am to go to church today." So I was so pleased to hear that I saved that letter.
Yes, in that trip east, I was propelled to national attention. And Brady, the Prince of Photographers, you see the picture he took, the Prince of Photographers shortened my neck, and he placed my hands on some books. Now, didn't he make me look scholarly there?
The letters just poured in after your nomination. There was one from an 11-year-old girl in Westfield, New York, right in this state, and she advised you to grow whiskers to improve your appearance.
I wrote that little girl right back, and I said that folks would think a silly piece of affection for a 51-year-old man to begin growing whiskers.
Oh, I think the word was affectation is what you meant. But she got you thinking about it, and after the November 6th election, you did let them grow.
Yes, and then in 1861, February of 1861, we were on our way to Washington. And the train stopped at Westfield, New York, and I spoke to the crowd there, and I told them about the little girl's letter. And they brought little Miss Grace Vidal to me, and I shook hands with her, and I gave her a kiss.
You know, seeing that Brady image again makes me think of what you replied when someone accused you of being two-faced.
Yes. I said, if I had another face, do you think I would wear this one?
came from, Father, but you really always had a way with words.
Yes, it might have come from me riding the legal circuit, Illinois legal circuit, for weeks at a time.
By the way, Father, just how did you spend all those evenings away from home?
Well, we lawyers had to provide our own entertainment.
Likely told stories around the fire half the night.
Well, one story we told was of
Patriot Ethan Allen.
yes, it was Patriot Ethan Allen, and when he went to England shortly after our Revolution, and the English mounted a portrait of George Washington in the outhouse that he was going to be using. Well, he showed no reaction when he came out. Finally, the Englishman asked him, and he says, "That is the perfect place for the image. For nothing would make an Englishman shed faster than a likeness of General Washington."
Oh, Mr. Lincoln, there are ladies here.
Beg pardon, ladies, and beg pardon, Molly.
Molly. He always called me Molly, right up until we had children. And then when little Bobby was learning to talk, we began calling each other father and mother to help him out, you see. That would have been the mid-1840s.
Yes, and then 1856, when the Reverend George Walker was reelected to the Illinois legislature, he invited me to Walker Township, just north of Quincy, Illinois, about 120 miles from Springfield.
That was when you were building up the Republican Party in our state. And you and Stephen Douglas and Jacob Smith went home with Walker in a hired rig. But it snowed and snowed that whole weekend long.
Yes, it did. And then Monday morning, when it was time for us to return to Springfield, the snow was so deep that the horse and sleigh could not get through. So, we purchased a herd of cattle, and we drove them through, making a pathway to Quincy. When we got there, we sold the herd and went on to Springfield, but it took us 3 days. Yep.
Did you see these New York Times? These were from our day.
Yeah.
November 7th, 1860. Does that ring a bell? November 7th, 1860.
Yeah, that was right after the election.
That was the
Let
day
me see
the
that.
day after the election. Yes, your
Yeah.
first election.
Yeah, what it says about that. I've got to get my glasses on.
Your
My
spectacles, of
yes.
course.
It says the total electoral votes for Lincoln was 171, which was 19 over the required majority, and that's without the returns from the 2 Pacific states of Oregon and California. I was pleased about that.
But then came the task of choosing your cabinet ministers, and they sometimes gave you fits.
Yeah, they gave me a merry chase.
Chase. Oh, especially Salmon Portland Chase, your Secretary of the Treasury.
Yes. Salmon Portland Chase and I, we didn't realize it at the time, or I didn't realize it, but we are 4th cousins once removed. Actually, I had him as Secretary to the Treasury, and then after I finally accepted his resignation, I appointed him the chief judge of the Supreme Court.
Well, that was after Roger Taney died in office.
That's
yes.
right. That's right. That's right.
Others.
But, you know, some of the cabinet members were good friends to, like Henry Seward. One time, he came to me and he chastised me for polishing and shining my own boots. And I said, then whose boots should I shine? We both had a good laugh over that.
Which one of your cabinet ministers was it who was said not to be entirely honest?
I think you're thinking of my first Secretary of War, Simon Cameron. He was reputed to be light-fingered.
I'd say so. Shady deals at the War Department, condemned muskets sold for scrap, and then bought back at a higher price.
Yes. Actually, Thaddeus Stevens, he was a Republican representative from Pennsylvania, and he questioned Simon's honesty. And I said, you don't mean to say you think he'd steal? And he says, not a red-hot stove. Well, I made the mistake of passing that humorous remark on to Simon.
I bet he was not amused by it, however.
Not at all. He demanded a formal retraction from Thaddeus Stevens. Now, Thaddeus Stevens, he chastised me for passing on his private remark, but he agreed to retract it. And so he formally said, I told you he would not steal a red-hot stove. I now take that back. You did.
You know, this other New York Times is also from our time here on Earth, 1862, and it deals with the capture of New Orleans. Remember the fall of New Orleans? I think you might have been quoted there. The president thinks it is a mistake, however, in announcing the city as fallen. He says it fell when it went down with rebeldom, and that now it has risen. That was April 29th, 1862.
1862. I believe that's when we first heard Julia Ward Howe's poetic Battle Hymn of the Republic.
Perhaps it was, yes.
I believe we ought to sing that. Would you lead the people in it?
Oh, if everyone will sing along.
If you got your song sheets, and I've got to find mine.
Battle Hymn of the Republic. Glory, glory, hallelujah. You have it, Father?
Yes.
You got to wait. Okay.
Here we go.
Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah.
His truth is marching on.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He handles the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
That was mighty short. Let's sing Marching Through Georgia.
Oh, that's the next one. Bring the good old bugle boys, we'll sing another song. Sing it with a spirit that will mark the world along. Sing it as we used to sing it, 50,000 strong. While we were marching through Georgia, hurrah! Sherman's march to the sea is long remembered. You know, a Union soldier once wrote home, Sherman, with his invincible band of veterans, is a rose thorn in the side of the rebels. They fear him more than all the rest.
Mother, you're thinking of your trips to hospitals during the Civil War.
Yes, I penned some letters for those poor boys who couldn't write, you know, with amputations or...
Well, folks likely don't remember that because you never allowed reporters.
No.
You filled your carriage full of baskets of food, fruit, and fresh flowers.
Oh, how the boys appreciated the sweet-smelling hyacinths and lilies of the valley and lilac blossoms that I placed right on their pillows. You see, it would somewhat mask the awful stench of decaying limb amputations and festering wounds and hospital disinfectants. Oh, such awful smells. I can almost smell it now. I've got to get my lavender.
Well, one time you emptied our whole gardens
Oh.
of all its strawberries.
Oh, no shortcakes that summer for us, but the boys
No.
needed them.
Yes. And one time you talked a local merchant into donating oranges and lemons to give to the soldiers to prevent scurvy. And that merchant was very impressed by the way you gently passed the fruit along to those soldiers, and you listened to the soldiers, and you penned letters home for them.
Now, Mr. President, that's quite enough about my poor efforts. They were only what the Almighty willed when thousands suffered wounds and disease in mere makeshift hospitals.
I spoke of God's will in my second inaugural address.
Oh, you did. That was a wonderful speech. That was a splendid speech. Why don't you share that with them, and then we'll sing your favorite tune.
Well, I can do that because I have the whole thing right here.
Oh, that was too long, but just get to that good part.
Well,
I think it's near the end.
all right. Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away.
Did you hear that? Now that's a line of poetry.
Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with a lash shall be paid by another drawn with a sword. As was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
Will you tell our kind listeners how the first time after the war you requested Dixie's land?
Well, the day after the Appomattox, when Appomattox
Surrender.
a crowd, an exciting crowd, was gathered around our house. They were waving flags, ringing bells, and firing guns in celebration. They even wanted me to dribble out a speech. But I didn't want to, because I dribbled out the one from the next evening. And I didn't want to do that.
You had planned that. But
Yes.
finally, you went to the upstairs window and watched them waving umbrellas, hats, and handkerchiefs. And you told them that you rejoiced that the occasion was such they could not restrain themselves. And then you told them about your favorite tune.
Yes, I said, Dixie is one of our best tunes. Our adversaries over the way attempted to appropriate it. But just yesterday, I stated that we fairly captured it.
In fact, you told them, I don't know if it was true, you told them that you asked the Attorney General, and he gave it as his legal opinion that it is our lawful prize, and then you requested the band to play it.
Yes, I did. And then I said, it is good to show the rebels that with us, they are free to hear it again. Mary, how about singing Dixie?
Oh, sure. If everyone will join with us. Dixie's Land. I wish I was in the land of God. Oh, God, look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. In Dixieland where I was born, early on, frosty morning. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. And I wish I was in Dixie. Hooray, hooray. In Dixieland, I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie. Away, away, away down south Dixie. Away, away, away down south in Dixie.
I still say that's a good tune.
Yes, Abraham, our lives did have good times and bad. We made plans. I remember Good Friday, April 14th of 1865. That afternoon, we two went by ourselves for a carriage drive. And I said, "Dear husband, you almost startle me by your cheerfulness today."
Yes. Actually, that day the very day I felt the war was finally over. And I said to you, we must be more cheerful from now on. Between the war and the loss of our darling Willie, we have been very miserable.
'Twas then you spoke of taking the family to Europe or to California when your presidency ended. We had no idea that going to Ford's Theater that evening would be your last earthly act. An assassin turned that fine evening into a nightmare for our family.
We arrived at the theater a bit late with our guest Major Rathbone and his fiancée. The play went on, and you asked me what Miss Harris would think of the way you held on to me so in public. And I said, she would think nothing of it. And then the audience laughed at a humorous line, and then everything went dark for me.
It was a dark time for me, too. The night you were shot seemed interminable. Bobby and I waited in vain for you to regain consciousness. At long last, Holy Saturday dawned. And if I had not been so distraught, I might have stepped out and seen and enjoyed the fragrant lilacs, for they bloom in Washington City around Eastertide.
Do you remember that gallant man with a white beard and mustache that gallantly he bowed his greeting to me as I was riding my horse to and from Anderson Cottage?
Yes, and you would bow your greeting right back to him. Mr. Walt Whitman.
Yes, I believe he wrote a poem about that night when lilacs last and the dooryard bloomed.
Yes, his ode to you is called Memories of President Lincoln. But we must remember, speaking of memories, that we are from the grave and we must not overstay our welcome here.
Well, it is time, but I must say one other thing, and that is that I am thankful that the country and I were able both to save the Union and free the slaves. Do you have any questions for Mary or myself?
We've either put them all to sleep or been perfectly clear.
Yes, ma'am?
I'd just like to say one thing, is that I wish that your program could be acted or whatever at every single school in this nation.
Oh my, I don't know whether we'll be able to come back. There are a good many, the population is a good deal larger, I understand, than it was when we were here.
Yes. We have visited
It's wonderful.
several schools.
Wonderful.
What's your favorite part of each character or aspect of Abraham and Mary, Todd?
I am Abraham Lincoln.
Yes, but what is your favorite characteristic as Abraham? How's that?
That is good. My jokes. I love to tell jokes.
Your father loves to
fact,
tell jokes,
yes,
stories.
In fact, one thing I must say is that whenever one of my opponents really gets after me and pushes on one subject and gets everybody else enthused over it and comes to me, I always tell a joke and get everybody laughing, and they forget about what that guy was talking about. Another question? Maybe one for Mary?
I was perfectly clear, you see.
Well, I thought somebody was going to ask, maybe, is it true that you had 70 gloves, 70 pairs of gloves?
Well, you know,
And why?
I was criticized in the president's house. We had to shake hands a lot, you know. And my gloves would be soiled. And they would criticize me for that, so I took care of that. I would change my gloves frequently. And that way, I always had clean gloves. And then they criticized me, of course, for buying too many gloves, but what else could I do? After all, don't you want your president's lady to be well-dressed and receive people? Yes.
I have a question for you. I've always read that Abe's wife was, after the death of their son, was not really communicating that well. Is that true?
Well, I took it very hard. You know, it was my second son's. Well, we lost little Eddie before we, in Springfield, before little Willie was born. And I took it very hard, yes. I just didn't feel like partying anymore, would you?
No, I would not.
And so I was a bit difficult, I suppose.
Well, I read different, I guess, different historians on what you were and how you were.
Oh, yes. History is told by many people, so
Yes.
it's from many points of view, I suppose. We don't have to worry ourselves about that anymore.
No, I believe we're finished now.
Oh, there's one more, I
Oh,
think.
another
One more.
question. Yes.
You didn't mention or you didn't quote your Gettysburg Address,
Mhm.
and I want to know if that truly was written on, did you write it on the way to Gettysburg?
I had written the first draft a long time before that.
Oh,
Now, I might have changed a word or two. Well, I did change a word or two on the way there. And then after I gave it, I actually changed a word or two again before I gave it to my to John.
Paper?
To my secretaries. They gave it to the newspaper. Because I always like the way to use words. I like to use words. And so I wanted to make sure everything was just perfect. So yes, I did. I made some changes on the way. And then again,
well, I've heard many explanations that it was written on a brown piece of paper.
some adjustments. There are actually
Right?
Yeah, actually, I know there are about 7 different versions of it now exist. And most of them did happen at different points in time.
Well, it was a wonderful speech you made.
Okay.
I have a question this time for you. I also have read that you more or less did a lot of filing in your hat, and that was little bits of things and thoughts, words, and so
Yes,
on
yes.
that you always kept in your hat. Is that
Always.
a truism?
Absolutely, I always did that.
The gentleman.
Yes.
Why,
Leroy? Yes.
why did you change the vice president? Why did you keep the first vice president you had?
Well, the reason for the change was because I was concerned about the war and after the war, and I was concerned about pulling the nation back together. That's why I had suggested having a Democrat as my running mate. But, well, they were really voted separately, but yes.
You also
I
thought you were going
suggested-
to lose that second election, and that you
Yes,
didn't think
that's
it would
true.
be of much importance, but
That's true. But also, I didn't know that somebody was going to shoot me, and that he would be the one trying to bring the nation back together again, which didn't happen the way I would have done it. Any other questions? Helen?
What would you have done if you had lived? You say pulling the nation back together again. What would you have done differently?
That is an excellent question. I wish I knew the answer for it. I really don't know. But I certainly would have shown more compassion, and thought more about what the Southern people had gone through also, and tried to bring them in better. And also, I would have brought the black population in better, I believe, than what happened. What took years, I think, would have taken a lot less time if I was kept in power. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. We're going to come out of character, and Eileen has to explain what this is.
oh, well, that's just a chart that shows the relationship between Lincoln and his Secretary of State. I don't think they knew it at the time, but they were. It shows that Thomas Lincoln, Abraham's father, was 4th cousin to the Honorable Salmon Portland Chase. I just think that's an interesting fact that isn't well known.
Okay, is that it?
Oh, and well, you'll see this Lincoln doll over here. I just had to bring this because I recently finished my term as regent of the Tuscarora chapter of DAR, the local chapter, and so they gave me this gift. I said I thought it was for my husband more than for me, but I think, what would Lincoln have thought? What would you think? What do you think of this? It says, if I were two-faced, would I be wearing this one?
That's what I said.
I guess they got it right.
Yes. Yeah, all of the script that we used is true.
Well, it's mostly quotes
Yeah,
from
they're quotes
different
from what actually happened.
that I just strung together more or
So
less.
we'll blame everything, including the joke, on Lincoln.
Very kind audience.
Yes.
Thank you so
We
much.
have something for you. We have a cat's meow of the school
Oh, how lovely.
and the history of our school,
Oh, my.
and then some oats for your car. note, on July 15th, we have a lecture at Cornell by Douglas Egerton. And Egerton will be talking about Reconstruction. He's an expert on Reconstruction. And what Frederick Douglass said is Reconstruction in the North was as necessary as in the South. And so Egerton will be talking about that. So if you don't come to the book group, come to Ithaca. And it's a free lecture. So there are details here. The other thing, while Mary Todd is out of the room, William Osborne Stoddard from Homer was Lincoln's third secretary. And he had two primary jobs. One was to intercept the hate mail, especially that Mary got. And the other thing was to keep her under control. He was the only one of the three secretaries that got along with her. John Hay and John Nicolay hated her. She hated them, but she really liked William Stoddard. So Stoddard would stand by her side at receptions and introduce her to the people who were coming through. And as she said, the day that Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he shook hands with 1,000 people. And when he came to sign it, his hand was so tired he could hardly hold the pen. But he said, "This is very important. My signature has to be firm when I sign the document." And so he waited a moment, and then he signed it. And it's one of the few times that he signed his whole name. It's Abraham Lincoln. Usually it was A. Lincoln, but he signed his whole name. Anyway, Stoddard got along with Mary very well. And what's interesting is the Library of Congress still has the letters that the Lincolns received, and it was literally thousands of letters of hate. And the letters that Abraham got, what he would do is note the letters in the margin. Like if he was going to write something, or if he wanted somebody else to write to answer the letter. And those are all still there in the Library of Congress because of William Osborne Stoddard. He saved every single letter they got. Yes?
Why did they hate her?
Why did they hate her? Well, because she was Southern. She was a Kentuckian. And she had family who were Confederate soldiers, for one thing.
So it was
Yeah. And she was seen...
personal.
Yeah, that's right. Well, she was seen as very arrogant. I think she was a very shy person, and she did have her troubles. She lost 2 sons, and then eventually loses a third, and then Robert has her committed. Abraham himself had a difficult time with her, it was a sad, sad time. But the burden was not only the war, the country, the Republicans who were seldom with him in Congress, and Mary. What a load to have to bear. Anyway, does anyone else have any questions or comments? I agree with Anna. This is something that I wish children could see.
I think the one thing that Mr. Lincoln had a lot of wisdom in regard that he had in his cabinet when he had his opponents there. He says, so I can keep track of them.
That's right. Yeah.
That's just plain smart leadership.
Absolutely. Well, he was clearly a brilliant man. He says that he had less than a year of formal education, and yet when you read those speeches, and he did pore over them and over them and over them. The Gettysburg Address was, he worked on it and worked on it and worked on it the night before, November 18th, and he didn't like to give impromptu speeches. He liked to prepare them, and if he knew he had to do something sort of on the spot, he still sort of wrote it in his head. If he knew that he was going to be called on to do something, he would think about it long before he gave it. Yes, sir.
And to his credit, Gettysburg especially was wonderfully short.
Mm-hmm. It was. That's right. Well, yeah, it was wonderfully short and powerful. The best things are very short. You know, the Declaration of Independence is 1,340 words. And Chip and I do a program on the Declaration of Independence. There is a federal order for the sale of cabbage that is 30,000 words. And you know, and then Thomas Jefferson and his four write it in a little over 1,000 words. You know, probably the greatest document in English ever written. So, short things are the best.
And maybe the school children should realize that those are written in script, that 10 or 20 years from now, our children won't be able to
That's
read.
right. Yeah, well,
Because they aren't learning how to write.
that's right.
You already can't read the Gettysburg Address a lot. I dare anyone to read it. The syntax is syntax we don't even use anymore. The Declaration is similar.
Yeah.
It's a different style of writing. The punctuation is different.
But she's talking about handwriting.
Well,
We will not. We're not reading it now.
no, we're not.
You know.
On the other hand, we already can't read handwriting.
Yeah. I mean, I will tell you this. This is off the record. I haven't seen a Cornell student in about 10 years who actually wrote in script. They print,
They don't.
and it's a sloppy print. And when they take exams, their exams are very, they don't do well, I don't think, because they can't write very fast. You know, in my day, I wrote as fast as I could. Well, it's hard to print that fast. And so, yeah, it's not good. Anyway, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
And there are refreshments here, and spend time and talk to each other. If anyone is new to the school and you want to know a little history, I'd be happy to talk about it. Or, there are others who know the history as well. So, anyway, thanks for coming.
Thank you.